The Cypher System is well known for its extremely streamlined gameplay and deep focus on narrative gameplay, especially in combat scenarios. But even this system isn't exactly safe for high-tier characters beating the living crap out of low-level monsters. So allow me to introduce you to the Swarm rule. Hi there fellow roleplayers and game masters, my name is Mr. Trosk and blah 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 blah. Today I want to talk about the Swarm rule for the Cypher System because earlier this week I did a video where I answered some questions from people who still had questions about the Cypher System even after me doing some videos about the Cypher System, some tutorials, some tips and trick videos here and there. People were still left with some questions and I tried answering them. One subject that came up was high tier play, when your characters are like late tier 2, going into tier 3 even, which is pretty early in the game. They already get pretty strong and lower level creatures might not dish out the same amount of damage you as a game master wish they did. Now I still stand by the main tip that I gave in that video, and it is sometimes as a game master you just need to embrace that. Really quickly, if you see Gimli run into a horde of orcs, he has no problem just killing an orc here, killing an orc there, killing an orc there, without taking any damage themselves. So I use that actually, for example, the cave troll scene in the first Lord of the Rings film, where a character might be like, let's say Gimli is a player character, you can give them the choice to automatically kill one orc. That's their action. They just kill an orc without like having to roll for it or anything, just kill an orc, making them feel like really heroic characters because they're able to do that, or go up to the cave troll and potentially get their ass handed to them. Now, if you want to toss some more mechanics towards that as a game master to make it more interesting and have a little bit more dice rolling and luck coming their way or luck coming your way, there is an official Swarm rule in the Cypher System rulebook. But before I go into that, I really quickly want to talk about a comment I got by Luis the Trolled. And Luis had an interesting comment because they basically use the Swarm rule, but they kind of use their own version for it that really makes a lot of sense and is actually something that I am planning on taking over and testing out. So Luis, thank you for that. So they say a suggestion for the one on higher tier of play and the difficulty on using low level creatures with tier 4 plus characters. Use all them low-level monsters as a swarm. That's the idea. It's the same with the swarm system. It's the idea of you taking a few characters, putting them together, and create one big character out of it, right? My players facing 7 orcs won't roll 7 defense rolls when overwhelmed. That is the idea. They roll versus the creature level, which is 3 for an orc, plus 1 per 2 extra creatures. So in total, that's going to be a level 6 when facing, I'm paraphrasing a few words here and there, when facing 7 creatures. So it normally is a level 3 creature, 1 orc, so 7 orcs become a level 6 creature, right? The swarm also deals its damage, 4 for a basic orc, plus 1 per 2 extra creatures, which also makes a shit ton of sense. Per extra creature you toss in there, it does 1 point of extra damage on top of the normal damage that one creature would do, right? Now, it is the last part here. No, there's a few things about this, that I really like. But it is the last part here that really sets it apart. Last, on a successful defense roll, the target still loses 1 or 2 pull points to represent being overwhelmed and taxed by the exercise itself, along with receiving lots of glancing hits. This makes so much sense. The Swarm rule in the Cypher System rulebook is actually much simpler than it. It is easier than this, but this is cool. First of all, the first part, it really gives the GM the power to decide how many creatures they want to put in a swarm. The other rules from the official books talk about a swarm being between like 6 and 10 creatures or something like that. This really tells you as a game master, take 1 creature and then start adding creatures, increasing the level and increasing the damage. So it gives you as a GM the control of how many creatures you want to put in one swarm, right? Also, you taking hits on your might or speed pool absolutely makes sense, because even if you are a strong character, again, you're Gimli, there's a bunch of orcs, they're fighting you, you're swinging your axe, you're bound to get hit every now and then, even if it's just some scraping hits, you're bound to be bumped into by one of your allies, you're getting tired from swinging your axes around after a while. So even if you're a heroic character, even if you're awesome, you would not be able to do this forever. So that really makes a lot of sense, and the official rules in the Cypher System rulebooks actually don't use that part. And I now want to use that part. Then a quick shout out to Jan Stals, because they pointed out the page number where you can find the swarm rule in the Cypher System rulebook. It is not really the swarm rule, it is on page 436. It's basically feels a bit like an afterthought, because it's like slammed all the way back into the book. But there's actually a really short section called Enemies Working in Concert, which is on page 436. And it says, although a group effectively acting as one as a special ability for some creatures, you could apply this to any creature you like. As a general rule, for every 4 creatures working together, treat them as one creature with a level equal to the highest of them +1, dealing a minimum of 2 additional points of damage. So a level 4 bandit working together with 3 allies, doesn't matter what level those allies are, as long as they're 4 or lower, you could team up and attack one foe as a level 5 NPC, because it's the highest level is a level 4 bandit, +1 because it is a horde, or it is like a group or a swarm, or whatever you want to call it. That means their attack deals more damage and it is harder to defend against. It also means less die rolling, so the combat moves along faster. So they dealing a minimum of 2 additional points of damage. So the idea here is the same. The idea is the same as Luis from the first comment. The idea is exactly the same. It is a swarm. It is a group of people. Now, the cool thing about this is it actually talks about, like, if you have like 1 bandit of level 4 and 3 bandits of like level 2 or 3, or like 1 bandit of level 4 with like 3 pet dogs or something like that, you can have more different creatures in like one group. It is easier with this system, but it only talks like per 4 creatures. So if you have per 4 creatures, it is 1 level higher. Add 4 more to it, it becomes 2 levels higher and it deals more damage and stuff like that. It is a pretty easy system, but I'm like left a little bit. There's just. I think the one from the comment just makes more sense and makes it more interesting for a GM. For me, this is too generic and it feels, it almost feels too easy, but it is an option. And basically, it is the official option, and it is the quickest and most streamlined option if you want to focus on narrative, you want to focus on, like, explaining what happens in combat scenarios, and you want to do kind of like the thing where people have an easy time knocking creatures around, but you still want to add some mechanics to it. It is actually a pretty good option for a GM who wants to have an easy life, an easy flowing game, and happy gamers. And there's actually a third option in The Strange. Yes, one of the Cypher System books called The Strange has an option for swarms. A different option and another option for you to use, which is on page 260, which was also pointed out to me by the same person, Jan Stals, so thank you for doing that. And it's just a little side note with a creature called the Red Homunculus, which is a creature that you could use as a swarm because it just looks like one of those creatures you could use as a swarm, right? So, when attacking with large groups of NPCs, the GM is encouraged to use the swarm rule. This allows the GM to have a group of 6 to 10 of the same creatures attack. So, now they talk about, like, at first in the official book, they talk about, like, per 4 creatures, but now they're like, hey, if it's a swarm, if it's between 6 and 10 creatures. If it's 6, it's the same as if it's 10. It's between 6 and 10 creatures of the same creatures attack en masse as a single creature that is 2 levels higher, inflicting double the original creature's normal damage. Now, this is the difference. The official book talks about groups of enemies working together. They don't necessarily have to be the same creature. This talks about a swarm. A swarm is more often the same creature, or at least the same type of creature, swarming up on a single foe, right? So in this case, the Red Homunculus would become if I'm not mistaken, so it is, if it's like 6 to 10 of these together, to have a group of 6 to 10 of the creatures attack with a single creature that is 2 levels higher. So it becomes a level 7 creature. The swarm of Red Homunculuses becomes a swarm of level 7 7, and it will deal, instead of damage inflicted 5 points, it will deal 10 points in case it hits. And those basically are 3 options for you to use a swarm system in your game for more streamlined and flowy gameplay during combat. They all do a different thing, kind of like the one from Luis is really where the GM is in control about the amount of creatures, and the swarm really adjusts itself to the amount of creatures exactly that are in there. One is more a generic thing of creatures working together. Doesn't matter if those creatures are different creatures. It's like a boss with like 3 dogs or something like that. That one is really easy to use, but it also makes sense, and it will really keep the flow going. And then the last one is really about swarms, but then it takes a little bit away from like the GM control. It's like just like it's between 6 and 10 creatures of the same type. So if you want more control as a GM, take the first one. If you want a really easy system, take the second one. And if you want something in between, take the third one. Last thing I want to say about this, whatever system you use for swarms, whatever you do, embrace the fact that your player characters are really strong, and I think using the system of them taking damage, even if they succeed in their defense rolls while they are fighting a swarm, is really a really good way to tell a story, because even if you go in with like 2 tower shields and you're holding back like a swarm of orcs, you're bound to get tired. You cannot do that forever, and even if you're heroic, even if you have a lot of might, you will not be able to do that forever, and that absolutely makes a shit ton of sense. Until next video, bye bye.